As you know, I'm passionate about promoting pupil well-being in schools and making that a core part of a good education. But I genuinely think sometimes people misconstrue that to me wanting to make sure that children are happy all of the time, and that we should take away and reduce all stress and make life nice and easy for kids. But there is a chapter in my first book which is all about the stretch zone. It's about getting children out of their comfort zones. It's about enabling them to embrace challenges, learn from their mistakes, take risks, and ultimately learn how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I see this as essential for learning and growth. And I loved reading your book, how much emphasis you put on creating classroom cultures where children get in their amber zones, maybe get stuck into grapple problems, experience struggle and difficulty in a safe and supportive environment. And you say this is where optimal learning takes place. Can you explain a bit more about the conditions that teachers can look to create to help children get into this sweet spot of challenge and learning?
Yes, I'd love to. I'd love to do another whole session with you on this, because this is my natural hunting ground. This is, this is where I naturally operate. This book, The Future of Teaching, is an unusual book for me because most of my other writing has been in what I think of as advocacy mode. And that's, in other words, I'm trying to explain something that I'm in favor of. And it was only because I thought that this neo-traditionalist wing is having such a stultifying effect on teachers' flexibility and creativity that I thought I needed to go into more analytical or more critical mode to write The Future of Teaching. But my natural habitat is around what I've called in the recent series of 4 books with various collaborators, the learning power approach. And I think about building up the classroom as being like an incubator. I have a number of different metaphors for this. Building up an incubator which just naturally incubates things like a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. We've gone a bit wrong with growth mindset by thinking that it's something that we have to kind of tackle head on, explicitly. We have to stick up lots of posters. And we have to teach kids to say, mustn't say I can't do it. You must say I can't do it yet. Right, as if those little things did the job. But actually, where growth mindset grows in a classroom where you feel psychologically safe to grapple, to struggle, to experiment, to discuss, to be half-baked, to have another go, to draft and redraft. In other words, to be a learner. Yeah. That's what learning is, where you have that sense of psychological safety to be a bit of a nitwit some of the time, or to look bad at doing what you're doing some of the time. And then you populate that incubator with juicy, difficult challenges. And therefore, in the process of wholeheartedly, enjoyably tussling with these challenges, you naturally develop resilience, you naturally develop collaboration as you and your talk partner are trying to figure this thing out together, and you naturally develop metacognition. Metacognition is the internalization of the conversation that you and your partner had whilst you were trying to make progress with a difficult problem. That's all I think metacognition is. As we're sitting there, 2 5-year-olds or 17-year-olds trying to figure this thing out, you naturally find yourself starting to say things like, well, what else could we try? Or are we making some assumptions here? Or let's go back and have a look. Or let's just stand back and have a think about what we've been doing. As you start having those kinds of conversations, so as Vygotsky taught us, what first happens in a social interaction becomes installed as a useful bit of software, a useful voice inside your own mentality, so that you can now talk to yourself in a productive way when you don't have a talk partner out there. So we're creating, what we're doing is creating this, building up this crucible within which these valuable dispositions are just naturally being welcomed and exercised as youngsters go along. And then there are all kinds of other aspects, which is like, this is my 3-hour workshop. which is like the way you lay out the furniture makes a difference to that culture. What you put on the walls makes a difference to that culture. Do you display kids' drafts on the wall so that they can point proudly to the progress that they've made?
Yeah.
Or do you only display the finished article, which makes it look as if something sort of sprang fully formed out of your mind, which sort of lies about the process of learning, process of learning and development. So there are lots of, in the work that I and my many collaborators and all these other centers around the world, like the expeditionary learning schools in the US, Habits of Mind schools in the US, the project for the enhancement of effective learning in Melbourne, in Australia, and so on and so on and so on. There is now a school of thought about how to mesh together a broad, valuable set of desirable outcomes for education with a sophisticated pedagogy that is well designed to build, to develop, to deliver on those outcomes. In other words, a coherent model of education that contains ideas about what we should be learning, what constitutes a good grapple problem, for example, ideas about pedagogy, ideas about assessment, so that assessment should now be focused more on monitoring improvement, what's called Ipsitive Assessment, rather than norm referenced or criterion referenced. We know the research shows that Ipsitive Assessment is much more motivating and much more engaging. Like your perspective is, I'm getting better than I used to be, rather than I'm 17th equal out of 31 in the class.
Which is the key to a growth mindset, isn't it? It's to recognize
absolutely.
I'm making progress, I'm growing.
Precisely. So all of these fit together. But the mistake was to take growth mindset and treat it as if it was something that could be taught. So we have to shift our metaphor when we're talking about these dispositions. They're not taught, they're not trained, they're cultivated. And we need a culture in the classroom where there's a consistent undertone that is encouraging youngsters towards, in the direction of becoming more independent, more self-reliant, more imaginative, more able to think up a possibility that they could try, more adventurous in their approach to learning, as opposed to much standard education. And this direct instruction is culpable of this, where the undertow is often very strongly in exactly the opposite direction, towards kids becoming more passive, more compliant, more docile, more receptive, less proactive, more worried about making mistakes, more only concerned with the grade that they're going to get, more extrinsically motivated. So if we're teaching with the best intent, will in the world, helping kids to get their GCSEs in a way that is undermining their independence and their imaginativeness, then I'm sorry, I have to call that miseducation in terms of my set of values for what's going to give youngsters a good flying start on life in the 21st century.
They tell me life is beautiful.